Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who are actually still at the conference and who hasn't left the building, which I understand is quite tempting at this time of the day. In a recent study that IBM released earlier this year, we learned that about half of the companies that we talk to are currently integrating generative AI into their products and services. In an even later study that IBM has done, which is not yet released, so meaning that what you hear now is classified information. From that study, we learned that about 86% of the Swedish CEOs are now deploying, and I'm Swedish by the way, are now deploying generative AI, or they are in the road for deploying generative AI within the next 12 months. This means that Sweden is actually one of the countries in Europe with the most AI-ready businesses. Why am I telling you this? Not just because I'm Swedish. I'm telling you this because I think it's interesting, as I was hosting a roundtable discussion on the topic of trustworthy AI last week in Stockholm at an executive event. And around my table, I had representatives from the largest Swedish banks. I have a representative from one of the largest insurance companies, as well as a governmental agency, some consultants companies, so a big mixture of people. And what hit me really during this roundtable discussion was how many of these people who were very non-vocal on the discussions around risks and challenges and how to handle these risks and challenges associated with AI. And why this is extra interesting is because the study that I've talked about, the one with 86% of the CEOs saying that they are now doing generative AI, within that study, the CEOs also said that they are actively involved in shaping the governance and ethical framework. So if we're now speaking about about a country with one of the most matured AI businesses, and they are non-vocal about these questions, what does that mean? Either the people that I met, either they had like the best AI governance strategy ever, and they didn't want to share it with the rest of us, or they were a bit embarrassed because they hadn't come further. But I think this is a good, or this shows what happens. Yeah, this clearly shows the importance of the topic that we're gonna speak about today, which is really AI governance, and in particular in relationship or in association with generative AI and foundation models. And to talk about this topic, obviously we need to talk about what is a foundation model. And I think many of you know that, but for those of you who might not have a clear view on it, a foundation model is really, it's built upon a specific neural network architecture, which is called a transformer. And this was an architecture that was released or published by Google a few years back. But it became very popular last year due to it being used in ChatGPT's GPT models. And I would say that the biggest difference between traditional AI and foundation models, because I mean, AI has a long history. It goes back to the 60s, and there have come new algorithms all this time. So the big difference, why we're now talking about foundation models and all the rest as traditional models is due to the way that they are being used. So traditional AI models are really, with those, we always start with a use case. So we start with a use case, and then we look for the data, and then we search for an algorithm that suits our needs, and we train that model. With foundation models, it commonly, in 2023, it commonly starts with a tech giant like Google, IBM, OpenAI with the support of Microsoft, which is more or less scraping the internet, taking a huge pile of data, and then training a model on that. And due to the huge amount of data, as well as the transformer architecture, it is now possible to take that model and use it for different use cases. And from IBM's point of view, we do not think that foundation models will replace traditional AI models. No, because they have different pros and cons. And one of the pros with traditional AI models is that they are less complex, still complex, but less complex to govern. And if we look at AI governance, there are really three aspects to this. The first side is lifecycle governance. And lifecycle governance is the activities that you do to make sure that the model is in a good shape throughout its lifecycle. So this is normally the activities made by MLOps teams and data science teams. So, for example, monitoring your deployed models, monitoring them for like bias, or monitoring them for accuracy drift so that you know when to retrain it. So that's the life cycle governance part. But then another part of AI governance is really the risk management. And this is all about managing and documenting risks, issues, and mitigation actions. So these are the actions that are commonly taken or of importance for your risk management teams. And the last part of this is really regulatory compliance. And that is obviously what it sounds like. It's the actions that you take to make sure that you live up to regulations. And these three are closely intervened because risk management has a great need of the actions that you do in lifecycle governance. You need the metrics that you get from the monitoring you do within lifecycle governance. And to be regulatory compliant, you need to make sure that your risk management documentation is in order, right? But with that said, I forgot to say that one of the things that is really driving, one of the things that is really important in European Union countries right now, which is sparking the interest of AI governance, is really regulatory compliance due to the AI Act coming up. And at IBM, we really support this kind of regulatory or regulations, laws and regulations. And the reason for that is that we do need some sort of structure to handle all the different risks that there are with AI. And already when we talked about traditional AI, we've talked about these risks for years. There are risks of like fairness issues, privacy issues. There are risks that the models are not being used for the purpose that they are being created. So that's a transparency issue. But now with foundation models, we see that there are even more risks. First of all, some of the traditional risks are even worse with foundation models. They're amplified. And then we see also new risks. So to give you an example of a traditional risk, or which is even worse, or which is amplified when talking about foundation models, I want to tell you a story. And this story starts in around the time when GDPR went into effect. At that time, I was working as a consultant. And we were working on particularly one project that I remember, which was where we put a lot of emphasis, a lot of work into making sure that we were living up to the promise to have people, giving people the right to opt out. That is, respecting people's right to their own data. And at the time, it seemed like quite a challenge to make sure that the data was, that we had a process that supported that we could remove the data before we retrained the model and all of that. But when I look at it now, I feel, well, that was not really a big challenge if you think about if you would do this with a foundation model. So imagine that you would now opt out from GPT-4. We're now talking about a model that takes more than 30 days to train. This is not a model that you retrain every week or even every month. And also, even so, imagine to find the data, your specific data, inside of that huge amount of data that has been used to train GPT-4. And now I'm sure I have people in the audience thinking, so what? Why would I ever want to opt out from GPT-4? My data is like a needle in a haystack. It can just stay there. Well, I don't know if any of you heard about or read on Twitter, or X is it called now, about this guy who said he had a lot of new friends after the release of ChatGPT. Why? Because every time someone asked ChatGPT about ChatGPT's WhatsApp number, ChatGPT said, well, sure, here it is, and handed out the number of this guy. So I think in that situation, you might start thinking about opting out. But when it comes to new challenges then, we have new challenges like hallucinations. And in the terms of large language models, that is when the model starts creating content which seem to be true, but it's actually not factually not true. It's untrue. And as you can see, there are a lot of different risks that we could talk about here today. I just wanted to give you some examples of like amplified risks and new risks to let you understand that this is really the driver why we need to think differently and why we need to change our AI governance structure. And as in this audience, at least half of you are likely to work in companies where you have already started to implement generative AI. That's what the statistics say, right? So probably half of you are working in companies where you already have generative AI and foundation models implemented in your products and services. And therefore, I would like to send with you a few actions and recommendations on what to think about when it comes to AI governance. First of all, have a look at your model approval process. And now you probably also think, What model approval process? Because when you work with traditional AI models, your data science teams choose themselves which algorithms to use for which use cases. And that makes sense. But when it comes to foundation models, this responsibility should probably be moving higher up in the organization, due to that the foundation models are likely to have been trained by external parties. So there could be that you have a large language model, for example, which is really good at, it's very creative, it's giving great responses, but it's also hallucinating a lot. So maybe this model is okay for certain internal use cases where your internal personnel will be using the service, but you might not clear it for directly customer-facing applications. Also, obviously, you need to update your enterprise risk framework. And apart for the new and amplified risks that we just saw on the previous slide, and with that comes also the fact that you need to monitor new metrics. So a part of this is also to look at your tools that you use for your lifecycle governance, because you might need to start monitoring new things. For large language models, that could be, for example, monitoring for toxic language. So abusive language, profanities, and stuff like that. When we train our foundation models, we make sure that in our data set, we do this kind of filtering before we train the model. But not all players do that. So that's why also you need to do this kind of filtering afterwards when you start using a foundation model. Another type of monitoring you might need to do is to look for PIIs, so personal identifiable information, just like the phone number that I just mentioned, to make sure that your large language models are not leaking sensitive information. Obviously, you also need to update your education programs, both for the people who will, the data science teams and the people, the app developers, and the people who work closely with this kind of technology, but also for the actual users, so that they understand the risks and the limitations of this kind of technology. And last but not least, I also want to say that you have to look at your vendor management. And what I mean by that is when your company is doing RFPs and RFIs, and you're looking at purchasing services and technology, you need to also include in that questions about foundation models, because it's of great importance for your company to understand like how the model was, the foundation model was created, on which data it was trained, which model it was, and so on. Also, you will want to understand from your vendors what kind of responsibility they will take on in the event of a future lawsuit. So this is also something that you need to think of. And with that said, now we've talked a lot about the risks. We've talked a lot about the not that inspiring part of generative AI. But obviously, the possibilities with generative AI and foundation models is immense. Otherwise, we wouldn't have every second CEO in different companies of the world saying we have already started using this kind of technology. In the same study, 75% of the CEOs said that they think that competitive advantage in the future will depend on who has the most effective generative AI. And I think that says it all. So with that said, I want to thank you for taking your time to stay today to listen to this presentation. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to either come with them now or just approach me when I leave the stage. Or even if you want to, you are welcome to contact me on LinkedIn.